and welcome to the Rooted Project podcast. The goal of this podcast is to help Christians in growing past the planted stage of their Christian life and provide meaningful, practical tips for teens and those that lead them. Hello, and welcome to the Rooted Project episode number 3. Today we're talking with a friend of mine, Shawn Myers, about missions in the church and teens, how the church and teens in general can be involved during this time of crisis. So Shawn, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and we'll get right into it.
My name is Shawn. Like you said, I'm from the country of Tanzania, East Africa. That's where I spent most of my life. My parents were church planting missionaries there. And it's a little bit interesting, honestly, to be on this side of things here in the States when this is going on, because usually when something would be happening, I would be on the other side and people would be talking about me. Like this podcast would be about me and my family instead of me actually being on this side. So it's great to be on this side and to be a different perspective. I was called to be a missionary to the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's where I'm currently training to be a missionary in the future. And yeah, is that sufficient for an intro?
Yeah, that's a pretty good intro.
Right.
So the first question I have, this is the big question, obviously, because it's kind of the big thing that's happening right now, is with your background in missions, how is the coronavirus and COVID-19 affecting missions right now?
Right. Well, that's a really good question, but it's also a very involved question. So if you don't mind, I'm going to try to break it down into a couple different parts.
Yeah, go ahead. Take it.
So first of all, I'm thinking, how is the coronavirus affecting missions, specifically in the two different kinds of countries that we see across the world? Because there are a lot of missionaries that are in countries that are similar to the United States. Missionaries in France, in Spain, Western Europe, even maybe in some Eastern European countries or some better-to-do Asian countries. All right, it's going to be a lot different experience than missionaries in third world countries. So in the first world setting, it's a lot similar to what we have in the United States, like I said. So people are going to be doing live streaming their services, just like we are here in the U.S. Of course, cities are going to have been more affected than out in a rural setting. But for the missionary and the way that his ministry operates, think about it in the terms of how it's going on with your church here in the United States. I was watching an interview yesterday with a missionary with GFF in France, and he's live streaming his services, just like we're doing at my church in Open Door. His members in his community are connecting with him through that. And I thought to myself, that's very similar to what I am going through. And so a lot of what we think of as missions going on around the world isn't so different from what we're experiencing here in the United States. When you get over to the third world environment, however, is where things really start to get interesting. Through the communication that I've had and paying attention to what's going on back in East Africa, where I'm from, I'm starting to notice a lot more going on. Churches are being shut down. And since people don't have, the technology that we do, a lot of places like in Kenya and Uganda, people are having to gather maybe even secretly in much smaller groups as opposed to even the 10 people or less thing, because they just shut them down completely. Does that answer your question, or you want me to go into more specifics?
That's definitely something I hadn't even thought about is the fact that some of the other countries are like the United States. And I guess that's a very American thing for me to not think about, is the fact that there are other countries that are as advanced as us, and they do have a lot of things that we have. So it makes sense that they are still doing the same things we are. I would have never thought. I was also curious about how the people in third world countries are meeting together, because there is that general limit that's put on things.
Yeah.
So from what you were just saying, that they're still trying to meet together, they just purposely meet in smaller numbers, or.
Right. So in Kenya, where my girlfriend is from, she grew up as a missionary kid there. I was talking to her last night, and she was saying that the churches were shut down, and she has a little bit of a larger church, and most of the people wouldn't have access to the technology. And so in that kind of a setting, people are going to be more so calling on each other as opposed to actually meeting. So you might get someone come over to your house, and church members are encouraging each other in that way, kind of like how your pastor would, give you a phone call and encourage you over the phone to make sure you're doing okay, just, face to face in person, because you can't use the technology. It's also interesting, in Uganda, I heard that there's a lot of suspicion going around about the white man and the white people who are in the country because this is a foreign virus. And so people are naturally going to be looking at the foreigners in the country to have brought that in. And so the missionary interview that I was watching, he was saying, one of my kids was walking down the street and they would yell out at him, Corona, Corona, because they're now trying to pin the blame on someone for what's happening in the country.
Wow. That's wow. I mean, I guess we did the same thing here in the United States, like with blaming China for the virus and stuff like that too. But that's pretty interesting. So the next question I have is, what are some creative ways that churches can reach out and help missionaries like at a time like this?
So one thing that I was starting to think about as I was thinking about how this is affecting missionaries themselves and in relation to how churches can be helping them is that missionaries on the field are going to be going through some hardships. I mean, similar hardships to what we have here in the States, but also a little bit more financial hardships. You're thinking about your churches. There's probably a drastic decrease in general of people giving their tithes and offerings and what they might normally give to the church. And so churches are going to be struggling financially. But then you got to think that directly affects the welfare and well-being of the missionaries on the field because they might be receiving a decrease in support all of a sudden. And so extra financial aid, if the church is able to, would be huge for missionary families. Heard of a church in West Virginia who had been saving up for something, that the Lord would have them to use in the future. And they decided to be able to give each of their missionaries some extra money that particular month, which is probably something the missionary wasn't expecting through all of this. So I think that would be a tremendous thing. Another way would just be reaching out in a personal way to the missionaries. All the craziness going on in the U.S. right now, people are thinking about themselves, their family, what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to our church, what's going to happen to my state and my town. And I feel like missionaries would probably kind of get set on the back burner of what people are thinking of right now. And so if you were to just reach out and say, hey, we haven't forgotten about you. We're praying for you. We're thinking about you. I think that would do a lot to help the missionary feel, as if they're still in the loop of things. And you asked something about being creative in the way you're doing it. I have a pastor friend at the church I was working for in Bible college this semester, and he actually thought of a really neat way to use Zoom. A lot of us are using Zoom right now for different meetings and stuff because we can't meet physically. He'll actually have a small church fellowship on Zoom and then have a missionary tune in and give an update. And then people can ask them questions over Zoom, how is this affecting you in your area? Or, what are your plans going forward? And that really helps the church members and the missionary to connect on a personal way because you're talking to them face to face. So if something like that is possible, I think it would be a wonderful idea to implement.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that sounds a lot like, again, kind of the idea of what we're talking about with, their churches not being a lot different than our churches. My my college and career class did something similar where we got on a Zoom call and just all hung out and talked. And that was an encouragement to me.
Right.
And I'm here in the States and they don't live that far away and stuff like that. So I can only imagine how much of an encouragement it could be to people who are like somewhere else. So along those lines, since we talked about creative ways that we can like reach out and help missions, what's something specifically that we can be praying for missionaries?
Very good question, because again, it's helping us think about what we can be doing. I would say, first of all, that missionaries are going to have to be making a lot of decisions under abnormal circumstances, just like we are. But almost think of that in the next level, because in some of these countries where crazy things are going to start happening, I was thinking about the example in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, where if you put the whole country on lockdown, people are going to start, going through extreme hardships. People who rely on their daily visit to the market to get food and supplies all of a sudden are confined to their homes, are not going to be able to live. Situations could get very bad very quickly. People in that third world environment that barely have anything to live on could start rioting. There could be an increase in crime. And so missionaries might have to make stressful decisions under these circumstances. And so the first thing, of course, would be to pray for wisdom. Pray for wisdom for the missionaries who are going to be going through things like this. You need wisdom just to be able to find your way, with what's going on here in the States. I need wisdom. You need wisdom. Our pastors need wisdom, but the missionary needs wisdom because they're going to have to think about what's best for my family, what's best for my ministry. I'm in the bush and, my church all of a sudden isn't allowed to meet. How am I going to turn this over to leadership? They're going to have to be making some very stressful decisions. Also pray for their safety, because if situations in countries deteriorate to the point where missionaries are going to have to leave the country, getting a safe flight out of the country could be very difficult. Finding a place for their family to bunker down and wait this whole thing out if it gets bad. I'm not saying it'll get bad, but if it gets bad, pray for their safety, and they could become easy targets for increased crime. Of course, pray for stability in the countries and for the virus concerns in these countries that don't have health infrastructures like Western countries do. It's always possible that the virus could spread an abnormally faster amount than it would here. So pray for their provision, as well as we mentioned financial things earlier.
So kind of along the lines of what we've been talking about this whole time of like what we can do. And I feel like I keep saying along the lines like that, but this kind of like the point of this conversation is like what we can do as people who aren't missionaries. What are some things that teens can do to stay in touch and be involved in missions directly or indirectly? And it doesn't even have to be necessarily like about this time or like during the coronavirus, just some ways that they can stay in touch in general, whether that's directly or indirectly.
Sure. Excellent question. So if you're a teenager and you're in a youth group and you attend a church and your church supports missionaries, you do have the opportunity to be involved in missions directly or indirectly anyway. But I think this is a unique opportunity for you to reach out specifically yourself to missionaries, whereas before you might not have thought, that would be weird for me to message a missionary over Facebook or send them an email or send, one of their kids a card in the mail or something like that. I think now would be a great opportunity for you as a teenager to take that step and say, these people go to my church, and by my financial contribution, whatever that may be, big or small, I'm contributing to their well-being. I'm contributing to their ministry. So for me to reach out in a personal way, I think that would be excellent for you and for the missionary to establish that connection between you two. Send them a postcard in the mail, send them a letter, find out if they have kids, ask them how they're doing. Missionaries love to talk to people, even if they can't answer right away because of, just the internet access that they have or the availability of certain things. It would still be great for you to write them a note over social media or an email and say, hey, I'm praying for you. I'm thinking about you. Is there anything that I can pray for you specifically?
That's, I think that's great, because for me anyway, and maybe this isn't true for all missionaries, I feel like if I were to be somewhere else, and I guess over time, that would be your home or stuff like that, but still to have like a little piece of home, whether it's like someone you don't even know, like reaching out to you and stuff like that, could be like a great encouragement, especially during times when they're making decisions where they don't really know how it's going to work one way or the other.
Absolutely.
That's part of the reason I love technology, is because it does make it possible to send an email or send a Facebook message or comment on an Instagram post or something like that. And along that, when it comes to technology and media, how can missionaries utilize social media like in their ministry, specifically maybe to stay in touch or maybe even to just like increase their ministry? I guess we've already talked about how they're not a whole lot different than us, but what are some unique ways that maybe missionaries can use social media?
Yeah. So again, it would probably have to be depending on where they are. I know a lot of missionaries in Western countries are using it very similar to how we would use it. Facebook Live, posting on Instagram, or doing Instagram Live. I think those are excellent ways for the missionary to be able to impact their community, because like what you're saying on your podcast before with Craig, is people might tune in to the Facebook Live who otherwise wouldn't have come to church. So in Western Europe or in a nicer country around the world, I think that is definitely an option. Even in certain third world countries, though, I was just with a missionary before I left our Bible college, we were doing our missions conference, and it was the first time they had to do it live stream it only and not hardly have anyone come to the church. And that was the missionary speaker's first time to go through that. It gave me an opportunity to spend a little bit more time, because I was one of the only Bible college students left on campus, to kind of, get his insight on some things. And what he was doing, I actually was able to help him set up Facebook Live, and he was able to do a Facebook Live to his members who are back in the Ivory Coast, where his ministry is. And so he used his wife's account, but he tagged each of his members who he wanted the video to get to, so that they would get the notification, so that they can tune into his message of encouragement to them. I thought that was a great way to, if your members back wherever you are and you're in the States, let's say, like he was, I think that's a great way to just establish with them that you're still thinking about them. And you can do that because of the technology. You wouldn't have been able to do that 15 years ago. But use what you have. Use Facebook Live, use Instagram Live, use those things to post Bible verses or messages of encouragement, whether that's a video or even just, typing something and sending it out.
Yeah, I think so. Being a media person myself and like loving cameras and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I think that one of the things, and I've been saying this a couple times, that we're going to walk away with from the whole coronavirus situation is like just a better understanding of how we can do church like through media. I'm not saying replace the church with media, but just do church with media alongside of it. And I think, being able to stay connected with your church, whether you're here or whether you're a missionary, that's been like one of the biggest blessings. And, we down talk social media a lot. We talk about how dumb it is and how people who are on it are stupid and stuff like that. But the reality is, if we're using it in the correct way, like if we're using it for God's glory, then it can be a great tool. And I was just curious how, if it would be different from missionaries. And I think the only way it really would be if they're over here and they want to stay in contact with people over there, just like we could do if we traveled somewhere.
Right.
So what is one specific thing that you would want to tell missionaries right now to be an encouragement?
If I were to say one thing to missionaries around the world, in the chance that they would be listening to this, or something that you guys can maybe adapt and put in your own words, is that God is definitely going to use you at this point in time for something special. And I would say, don't let what is happening around you distract you from the fact that God has put it all in place. What are some unique ways that you can reach out during this time to the people in your community? I'm just thinking about all the craziness that's happening, or that could potentially happen in those third world countries where situations could deteriorate rapidly. If you trust the Lord through this, as a missionary family, someone who's in charge of a ministry, you're going to be able to look back and see how God did some amazing things. So I would say keeping your eyes on the Lord and not letting it distract you from the fact that he is controlling everything, that he's going to use you for something great during this time, is what I would say to them.
Awesome. I think that's another great thing is like when we look back on this time, like realizing like how God used us, or how God could have used us if we don't like react the right way. So Shawn, that's all the questions I have for you. I'll give you a couple minutes to make some closing comments, shout out your podcast, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really do, again, appreciate being on here, and I think it's a great talking points and great for us to be able to get kind of these things, stuff that I've been thinking about over the past few days. It's good to get them out in the open and some sort of, medium to talk about. I did want to share one quick thing, and that is I have had the opportunity to come into contact indirectly with several of our missionaries with our mission board, and they have offered several points of excellent advice to Bible college students specifically, but also could be applied to if you're a teenager and you had to come home early from school during this time and the different circumstances that you're experiencing. Some very helpful, something that really helped me today think about and realize. And first of all, the big thing that they all have been saying is redeem the time at this point in your life. You're going through a time that no one's ever gone through before, and people are just at home. They're not doing a whole lot, and there could be a temptation to kind of just relax, sit back, and do whatever you want for the entire day without really doing anything productive, because there's not as much accountability. but they've all been offering sound pieces of wisdom in this area of redeeming the time, and that you could use this time to teach yourself new things, to learn different things, to pick up a book off the shelf that has been sitting there you've been wanting to read. Well, now is your opportunity to do that, to discipline yourself to get productive things done, because one missionary put it this way: this could be a proving ground for you. This could be the make it or break it point in your life. If God is calling you to do something great, for example, be a pastor, a missionary, an evangelist, this could be the point in your life that determines, are you going to be disciplined in your day-to-day life in the future during your ministry, or are you just going to give into the temptation to fall back and do nothing and to let your fleshly desires determine what you're going to be doing throughout the day? And so I thought I would just share that real quick. That was a blessing in my heart through the missionaries, and a good challenge to keep my mind focused on the right track. Did want to mention, thank you for bringing it up. I do have a podcast that I just started during this time. That's my way of redeeming the time, is figuring out how to make a podcast and put it out there. It's based on my video series, Why a Missionary? And if you're a young person, teenager, junior higher, even someone around my age, or even a little older, like if you're an old man over there like Josiah, this is specifically geared towards you, to get you to think and to challenge your understanding of the status quo Christian life. Is God calling me to be a missionary, and how can I be thinking in those terms? So it's called Why a Missionary. Right now it's on Spotify, Google. It's on Google. It's on Breaker and Anchor and some other mainstream ones. It should be on Apple Podcasts pretty soon. But they're short segments, 4 to 5 minutes long. I think that would be a blessing to you if you're a young person.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Shawn. If you enjoyed this podcast, go ahead and let us know somehow. If you're watching the YouTube video, go ahead and like it, or let me know in the comments. If there's something else you'd want to talk about, somebody else that you think would be good to talk to, let me know. The Rooted Project is on Spotify and Anchor as well, and then we're on YouTube as well. So hope this was an encouragement to you guys. I hope that you'll understand a little bit more about missions, understand a little bit more about how we can be active in missions and not just letting missionaries kind of go to the wayside, especially during a time like this. So I still haven't figured out how I want to end this. So bye.